Beach FM, locals talking to locals.
And we welcome into our program this morning Michael Scott, who stepped in for Jocelyn Pravanoff, Chair of the Waikanae Community Board. Then he's going to wear another hat just a little later on as Chair of the Finance Committee. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Nigel. It's great to be in the studio again.
Roared in at the last moment, yes.
It's always good to be on beach. I enjoy our chats.
Good on you. Well done. And Jocelyn's got her dad's having, what, 93rd birthday?
93 today, Jocelyn's dad. So he's had a great innings, and I know that he's got a caring family looking out for him, so I hope he has a wonderful day.
Yeah, sure. Well, we got an Easter market this year up at Waikanae?
Yes, the team with Destination Waikanae and others are organising the Easter market. It'll be on Easter Saturday. The stall holders from previous years already had an email, so as long as the weather gods smile, it'll be another fantastic day in the Mahara Square.
They've gained popularity again, haven't they?
Look, the markets are always great, and it's interesting to see how they've evolved over time. Community groups really find it a useful fundraiser, but also simply to be out there and be seen if you're a member of the community. But it's a great time.
Great.
And of course we've now got the grass down and a little sound stage. I'm sure there'll be a bigger one put up for the day, but it's just a magic event.
Sure. And we had a bit of a Chinese Dragon Day, or is it this Saturday, is it? With Chinese dancers and so forth?
They were practising, was it last weekend? They were practising, I saw them.
Yes.
Having been caught dancing a few weeks ago with a bubble maker there, and some people tell me they've got it on film and are going to play it at an appropriate moment, I made sure I stayed in the background for the Chinese dancing practice.
Fair enough too. Now, the new Koikoi subdivision up the top end of Wanara Ave is open for public to go and have a look up there this weekend, I think.
And take the chance to go and have a look, because the views will be breathtaking.
They will be.
And it's a wonderful new subdivision tucked right up there on the hill. As we talked last week, it's now time, Nigel, I think, for us to be chatting as a council with some of the subdividers. The subdivision plans to go all the way through to Hadfield Road now. So whilst after June we'll be building the emergency crossing in Waikanae, it's a real chance now to think about that second main crossing at the northern end of Waikanae across the rail corridor.
Yep.
And more especially when we end up with the old state highway returned to us as a local road, the speed limit dropped. It's an ideal time to begin that discussion.
Fair battle going on with the cyclists, though, and angle parking in Waikanae, State Highway 1, isn't there?
So that's a very difficult decision to make, and it's one which the Community Board will have to make a recommendation on, but Council will ultimately have to decide it. I simply cannot see myself how we would possibly want to put cyclists down that busy road. I don't want to be responsible for somebody being seriously injured or potentially killed. I think we need to be far more creative and take them up Marae Lane, even if Marae Lane has to become a one-way like we did over near Utauta Street in order to create that extra parking. We just need to think through this very carefully. Our retailers have been wanting angle parking for 30 years, and the handover they see is a chance to do it. If we don't want our retail area to die, we need more people able to park. And the only way you get more parks is angle parking.
I can see the argument, though, with the cyclist saying angle parking, backing out. Some people won't be able to turn around far enough and will not see the cyclist. That's my big problem.
No, the issue for me is we currently don't have a lot of cyclists coming through there. They tend to take an alternative route to stay off the state highway. We've got a cycleway policy through the district. I think we just need to think a little bit outside the square. We don't actually have to run the cyclists up the main street. We could actually just divert them around the back and make it just that little bit more safe.
Is it safe going around the countdown there?
We need to look at
that. And out. That's busy, isn't it?
Oh, it's very busy, and that's why we need to have a look at that road layout. We need to have a look at which way the traffic moves, and we need to look at ways of calming it. Wherever you go, the Waikanae town centre is hellishly busy with lots and lots of cars, and that's never going to change. In fact, it's going to get busier. We're going to have more and more buses using that as a terminus as well. So then you say to yourself, whilst we need to make some provision for cyclists, how do we do it in a way that's safe? Because there's no point in doing it and then having a string of injuries, and there's also no point in prioritising cycling and losing a line of shops.
All right, so that'll come up for debate at the next board meeting, I should imagine, will it?
So it's going to have to be on the agenda shortly. I know that there's some further consultation in March, and then it'll be coming on to the council agenda because, of course, the expressway's now been open for quite some time. The highway handover has to take place within a couple of years of that opening, so we're starting to run up against a time frame.
Yes, well, end of this year, isn't it?
That's right.
Right, okay. We haven't got the name sorted out for that road yet, though, have we?
So there's a briefing on at Council this morning about how staff see that. My own view is that the community boards themselves actually came up with an eminently sensible set of solutions that worked for each of their areas. They didn't cross over into each other's. They provided a Maori name for a section of the street, a logical area coming into Otaki. North of Waikanae, an old family development name from the very, very early days of Waikanae, keeping Main Road in Waikanae as it's always been. I hope that councillors will see the logic in what the community boards proposed and go with that. We're never going to get one overall name until there's a far better economic development scheme that will bring in both Pororua and the Horowhenua. Then we might be able to have a name for that old road.
Good. All right. Well, we'll get on to the rating in just a moment, shall we, Michael?
Absolutely.
We'll play a few ads to pay the bills, and then we'll get the weather out of the road, and we'll come back and talk rating. Now, while we've got Michael Scott in the studio this morning, he's just wrapped up the Waikanae news for us, but we'll put him onto the air now as the KCDC Chair of Finance, and we'll talk some ratings. Well, once again, good morning, Michael.
Hey, Nigel.
Rating. Now, you'll be looking at what rates are going to be put upon us once again very soon, but how are you going to put this into place this year? Because you're trying to cut down on expenses, and rightly so, on costs. So if you do that, have you got to put the rates up to cover those costs that you're going to be spending money on?
So we're currently having a program of spending less, we're paying back more, and we're closing the depreciation gap. So there's a number of things within that. Spending less in terms of we're actually going to have a capital expenditure budget we can deliver. So we'll still spend in the next 6 years something like $165 million. It's a vast amount of money. So nobody should be out there thinking, oh, stuff isn't going to get done. It is going to get done, but when this council says it'll happen at this time, then it's actually likely to, rather than simply get pushed out.
Okay.
So, for example, in the long-term plan consultation, we'll be saying things like we can do the Mahara Gallery upgrade in year 2/3. And we've talked to the trustees at Mahara, and they're 100% behind that, because that gives them a realistic time to raise their share of the money. In terms of the the Paikock seawall, for example, we've talked to the community board, we've talked to the community interest group, we've been out there talking to the public. They acknowledge that they want a particular type of wall, and we're happy to build that for them, but we'll build it in year 4-5. Because that's when we've got the money. There's no point in telling them we're going to build what they don't want starting next year, because that's just too many fights to buy, and we don't need to have them. We've got a resource consent for what they want. We can do the design work in the next 12 months to make sure it happens, to give them some certainty of project. That's the way this new council's working, so that when we say it'll happen, it actually will. But we've got a couple of issues. We currently spend 1.8% of our rates closing the depreciation gap. And so somebody said to me when I was having coffee the other day, what is this depreciation? Well, what it means is simply this, Nigel, that you buy something in year 1, and over the life of that item, it loses value. Now, if you take it to your own household, you have a seat out on your deck. So each winter when it comes round, you stick it in a big plastic bag to keep the rain off it. When the new year comes round, you take the bag off and you give it an oiling and you check the bolts and things like that. But over time, it wears out until you have to buy another one. in business, when things wear out and you have to replace them, during the life of that item, you are supposed to effectively or notionally put some money aside to replace it. That's depreciation. And what's happened at KCDC, as with a lot of local authorities, is that wasn't fully funded. So what it meant was we were having to borrow all the time in order to replace things that we should have had contingency for. So we're closing that gap. Currently, 1.8% of our rates is used to close that gap, and the question is whether we do it a little more quickly, because when we do, it means that there's more money to spend on things that people want. So that's one of the issues we're grappling with. Now, our rates system currently, we need, this current financial year, 79.6 million. So I'm just calling it 80 million because this crazy point this much is just ridiculous.
80 million.
So let's say $80 million. Now, so think of it as a pie. And the only way we get that is from rates. And currently, the residential ratepayer pays the vast majority of that. And of that pie, 51% of it is made up of, so better than $50 million is made up of fixed charges. And we think that's unfair, and it is unfair. So what we're going to do over the next few years is we're going to change that model. So what we're going to do is we're going to reduce the number of fixed charges, and we're going to make the rating system fairer. So the ideal is 30% by fixed charges, 30% by land value, 30% capital value, and a small amount from business and other sources.
So what's in your fixed charges?
Oh, so the one we're currently looking at is a transport fixed charge. So every property is simply levied an amount of money for transport services, in the same way as there's a general rate for libraries and sports facilities and things like that. So we're starting slowly, we're taking that transport rate and we're saying, well, let's not levy it as a fixed charge, let's do it slightly differently. Let's levy it on a capital value basis so that it's slightly fairer. What we found recently was that with the revaluation, an extra $1 million was going to have to come out of residential ratepayers' pockets. So we thought that's unfair. We need to spread that. We need to ensure that we don't create extra pain for businesses or rural, but we need to make sure that rates are fair across the district. So what we're going to do is twofold. We're going to create a new rating mechanism for economic development, and we're going to build that against businesses, against commercial rates. It's not new money, but it starts a new way of thinking about how we collect those funds. We're going to have one less fixed charge, and we're going to levy that across people's properties by a value basis rather than simply you're paying this. That's actually going to mean that most people pay quite a bit less, a bit like the water did.
Right,
Remember the old days when we had a fixed water charge, which would have now, if we'd continued to run it, been getting well over the $650 figure. Well, now, of course, you pay a little over $1 a day for the connection, and then you pay for your water use. The vast majority of ratepayers have been substantially better off by that, paying for what you use. So that was a fixed charge we've got rid of. Now we're going to do the transport one. So what that's going to mean is that over time, fixed charges will drop from 51% down to 42% of your rates. It means that land value will be about 36% of the rate take, and capital value will then be about 16% of the rate take. So what we're trying to do ultimately is get to a 30-30-30 kind of a split with some add-ons at the end. We want to try and make the rating system fairer. Now, no one likes paying rates. Look, it's just another longer word for tax. But whilst local government exists, it has to be funded. And there are ways that we'd like it funded, like we would like a little bit of the petrol surcharge taxes which the government collect. We get about 0.2% of that. We'd like that to rise over time. That would be a simple, painless way of helping fund local government. The problem for Kapiti, as we've talked before, Nigel, is we don't have any large commercial assets to rate. So if you're in Nelson, of course, you get millions of dollars by way of dividend from the Port of Marlborough. But we don't have that. So we're a rate-based system. So what we need to do is make sure that we levy those rates fairly, and that's what Operations and Finance is set to do over the last 2 years of this triennium.
So our rating system, I mean, those fixed rates, that would include running the council itself, the wages, etc.
Yes.
And that's a big part of it, wouldn't it?
That's OPEX. In any business, your wages and costs are huge. Now, we have kept our OPEX at a very much the same level over a number of years. We simply haven't been employing lots of new staff. What we have done is convert people who were on contract into full-time employees. Many of those people's wages were being paid by grants and advances in any event, so they were still on the books. They were a staff member in every other way possible. So we've done the fair thing and, in my view, the right thing. We've stopped them being contractors with special and different requirements, and we've made them full-time staff.
Right.
But importantly, with cutting back the amount we're spending, we don't need the number of contractors. We don't need the number of consultants that we previously had, and that's where the operational savings are.
Right. What about our libraries, things like that? Would you be looking at charging for the taking out of books? Because I see we've got 3 new librarians, and 100,000 odd books were issued over the holidays, which is great. But, I mean, it costs a lot to run a library. It's been thought about, it's been debated, and it's been argued. We can't do that. But really, have you got to look at that?
Libraries and swimming pools are massive loss makers for council. Let's be clear. We have them because they're socially desirable and really nice things to have. But if council wanted to balance its budget, it would either close the libraries or the swimming pools or make them user pays. Now that would mean that an adult swim would be something like $30. So that's the sort of subsidy. It's about 4 to 1 that we spend. But children learning to swim, people using our aqua facilities is really important, and therefore all the ratepayers subsidise that. In terms of the libraries, what we are doing is spending a bit of money on rolling out some new technology. All these people who have Kindles and other sorts of reading devices, they want to get into the dock your device onto a docking port and download a book that's electronic, that stays available for a period of time, and then if you don't renew it, it simply is unreadable on your device after a period of time. That's much more effective than a paper copy, which, of course, wears out over time. But our magazine collection, our DVDs and our book collection, we continue to spend vast amounts of money increasing them. They are enormously popular.
Right. So, in a nutshell, looking out to the future, what would our rates likely to be this year? I mean, it's a fair way off and you haven't discussed it fully, but just to give us a bit of a crystal ball gaze.
So I'm lucky. I chair Operations and Finance, and I suppose I see figures. I regularly have a bundle of papers to work through, and sometimes when the maths gets hard, I actually take my shoes and socks off in order to count up the big numbers, Nigel. But we did 5.74 last year because we had some things to pay for that just simply hadn't been paid for a long time. I would expect that the initial figure that we'll go out in the LTP on will be about 4.7, and my pick is that we can probably get it down to about 4.3. Okay, and that would mean next year the same sort of figure. What I don't want to see is councillors getting into that craziness whereby in election year you have an artificially low rate increase, because actually I don't think our ratepayers are stupid. I think the vast majority of them have seen through that now. having a really artificially low rates increase for the election year, Nigel, simply means that the following year the incoming council has to pay for what wasn't paid the year before. Long term, I'd like to see us with rates increases around the 4%, and I don't like the figure, but bearing in mind we probably need to spend 3.8% just to stand still.
Yes, I thought it might have been a bit higher than that, because with $260 million of stormwater to be rectified here on the Kapiti Coast over the next number of years, some of it's got to be done urgently. I thought it might have been a bit higher.
No, look, I think that staff and councillors are working really hard on a program that's realistic, and I'd be very comfortable going out and defending 4.3. I think we could show exactly what we're going to spend it on if we can get it to that sort of a figure. Look, there are $250 million at least of stormwater work to do. I think, in fact, if you peeled back the page, there's probably that much again. So the current long-term plan that we're going to change sees stormwater work done over 65 years. We're going out with an LTP that says let's do it in 45 years. Now, I know 45 years is a long time. I probably won't be here to see the end of that. But the fact of the matter is that the priority, in my view, has to be people's homes are dry first. Secondly, their garages and gardens. And then thirdly, parks and reserves and things like that. And that's the order it's got to be. People need to be secure in their home, and that has to be the first priority for stormwater.
Michael, we thank you for your time this morning. It gives us an insight of how you operate this, and it's got a lot of logic behind it too. Folks, it's Michael Scott. He's the KCD Chair of Operations and Finance Committee, and he'll keep us up to date throughout the year as they get down to the nuts and bolts. Thanks very much, Michael.
Pleasure.
106.3 Beach FM.